Alright, so let's have some fun with this rumor. This is a rumor that um, popped up a few months ago, and it was quite possibly one of the, if not the hottest rumor in last off season. It's about Dodge returning to NASCAR and Stewart-Haas Racing becoming their flagship team. Now, on the surface, this is a very, very crazy rumor indeed. But when you think about it and you dig deeper and you do some research on everything that has been happening outside of NASCAR, then it seems like a foregone conclusion that Stewart-Haas Racing might switch to Dodge. Of course, I'm going to give my 2 cents on it as to why that might not happen and why it may not be logical, but still, it's still a very hot rumor, so let's get into it. So the first part of this rumor dates back to the year 2020, just 2 years ago. It's almost the end of the season, and Tony Stewart wants to sign a driver to replace Clint Bowyer in the number 14, who is retiring. It is no secret that that driver was Kyle Larson, as Tony Stewart had always spoken so highly of him, and he has always said it time and time again that his dream was to have Kyle Larson drive one of his cars. That has always been one of his dreams, and that was a certain possibility, as Larson to the 14 was all but a done deal. All Tony Stewart needed to do was get the approval of Ford, and that is it. Like, that was it. All Tony Stewart needed to sign Kyle Larson was get the approval of Ford, and Ford said no. They didn't want to sign Kyle Larson. They felt like Larson was a little bit too much of a PR nightmare to even bother signing. Now, to be fair, I do not blame Ford, because at that point it was just like a handful of months. It wasn't even a full year since the whole Kyle Larson iRacing incident controversy. So I understand why Ford didn't want Larson. However, that decision just aged very poorly, especially since Larson went to Ford's rival in Chevrolet. He reunited with Ford's rival in Chevrolet. He got signed to Hendrick Motorsports, won 10 races and a championship. And Stewart-Haas Racing, meanwhile, they struggled all season long. They only won one race, and they didn't even make it into the round of 8. Neither of their drivers made it to round of 8 in the playoffs. So of course, Tony Stewart had got to feel some type of way, and there have been reports, and quite understandably, that his relationship with Ford had been soured. Now again, I do not blame Ford for making their decision, because Larson was a bit of a PR nightmare at that point in time. But still, if you're Tony Stewart, it's gotta hurt. You gotta be feeling some type of way, seeing how the guy that you really wanted the most, the guy that you've spoken so highly of, and you really wanted to fight, and you fought tooth and nail to get into your team, that you didn't sign him because of some executive decision. That's really gotta hurt. And because of that, it's no wonder that Tony Stewart has been pissed off at Ford ever since. Now, this is where the second part of the rumor comes in. Ever since Tony Stewart made the transition to full-time ownership after retiring from full-time racing in 2016, it is no secret that he has been exploring a lot of new ventures outside of Stewart-Haas Racing, of course. Sometimes to a fault. So much so that many people have felt that he has become detached from the team. And detached, as in he doesn't really pay attention much to what's going on in the team. Many people have said that Stewart-Haas is kind of in the same thing since he's dealing with that problem over in Formula One. But I digress. My point is that these ventures have led Tony Stewart to form a connection with Mopar and Dodge. I said recently that Tony Stewart had a new NHRA team. He formed a new NHRA team this season. That team is going to be powered by Mopar engines. That means Dodge, basically. And the drivers will all be factory drivers, Dodge factory drivers. One of those drivers being Tony Stewart's fiancée or wife. I don't know if they married, but my point is Tony Stewart's wife is a Dodge factory driver. Now, Tony Stewart, this is not the first time that he has had a connection with Dodge. He's already have some previous relationships with them. His World of Outlaws team, his USAC team, his late model program, Tony Stewart Racing, they ran Mopar engines in the early 2000s up until around 2007, 2008, which is when they made the switch to Chevrolet because Tony Stewart was moving over to Stewart-Haas Racing in 2009. And then they switched over to Ford in 2000. And then in 2017, they switched over to Ford because Stewart-Haas Racing switched to Ford too. So any manufacturer switch for Stewart-Haas Racing, it would be logical to think that if Stewart-Haas Racing makes a manufacturer switch, they will also be switching to those engines in manufacturer support for Tony Stewart's sprint car program. And of course, that is something that Dodge and Mopar, they provide. And Tony Stewart already has experience with Dodge and Mopar. Now with this new, especially now with this new NHRA team. And for those of you who may be thinking, oh, Dodge left NASCAR in 2012, they're not going to be coming back anytime soon because they left NASCAR. NASCAR didn't left them. You need to understand why Dodge left NASCAR in the first place. They didn't leave just because. Why? I mean, look at the Gen 6 car. Dodge had already unveiled their Gen 6 car. If Dodge wasn't planning on staying in NASCAR after 2012, they would have never revealed their Gen 6 car. Yet they did. Why? Because they were planning on staying in NASCAR for the long haul. However, they didn't. Why didn't they? Because they couldn't find a flagship team. After Penske left Dodge to go back to Ford, Dodge could not find a flagship team. And it wasn't by a lack of effort either. They tried to convince several teams to switch them, to make the switch. They tried to get Richard Petty Motorsports, they tried to get Furniture Row Racing, they tried to get Turner Motorsports, the team that had Kyle Larson as their driver, and they also had Rich Sorensen, they also had Jason Leffler, they also had Dylan Kwasniewski later on. That Turner Motorsports, that Xfinity Series team back in 2013, yeah, they tried to convince them to switch to Dodge just so they could stay relevant. And hell, that's not even the craziest thing they did. They even tried to coax Michael Andretti to dip his toes into becoming a NASCAR team owner, just so they could have a Dodge flagship team with Kurt Busch as their driver. Yeah, that was a hot rumor at the time back in 2012. Michael Andretti, Dodge team in NASCAR with Kurt Busch as the driver. That was a really hot rumor at the time. But it just goes to show you how desperate Dodge was to remain in NASCAR. But at the end of the day, they just couldn't. No team will give them the light of day, and they had no choice but to dip. And this really makes you think about the luxury that Chevrolet, Ford, and Toyota had back then, back in 2012. Because Dodge, they only had Penske. And when Penske switched to Ford, it was over for them. It's not like Chevrolet. If Hendrick or Richard Childress, they leave Chevrolet, who cares? They have like 9 other teams. They have other teams. They have Ganassi. They also have Furniture Row. They were a Chevrolet team at the time. They can survive. Look at Toyota. If Joe Gibbs Racing left Toyota, they had Michael Walter Racing still. They would have survived back in 2012. If if Roush left Ford, it didn't matter because they will have Richard Petty Motorsports. They will have Front Row Motorsports. They would have stayed competitive. The Wood Brothers as well. Wood Brothers Racing. They would have stayed competitive. They still would have stayed relevant in NASCAR even if one of those big teams left. Because they have a lot of other teams to compensate. The same thing could happen right now in 2022. The same thing could happen right now if Joe Gibbs Racing left Toyota. If Joe Gibbs Racing leaves Toyota right now, because there are no other Toyota teams in NASCAR, like Joe Gibbs Racing is literally the only Toyota team. If they leave, it's over for Toyota because they don't have Joe Gibbs Racing is not only their flagship team, it is literally their only team because every other team like 2311, Cowbush Motorsports, all of those teams, they have all of those other teams, they have alliances, technical alliances with Joe Gibbs Racing. So if Joe Gibbs Racing makes a switch, so will those teams. And the same thing goes for Stewart-Haas Racing. If Stewart-Haas Racing were to make the switch to Dodge, they would not be alone because they have Rickwar Racing, and Rickwar Racing, they have experience with Dodge. I remember back in the early to mid 2000s, Rickwar Racing, they had a truck series program and they were running Dodge engines there. So they have experience with Dodge as well, just like Tony Stewart has. They also have RSS Racing and SS Greenlight Racing over in the Xfinity series, which are two other four teams that have an alliance with Stewart-Haas Racing. If Stewart-Haas Racing makes a switch to Dodge, then so will those teams in Xfinity. So you guys can already see where I'm getting at. Stewart-Haas Racing could be the team that Dodge needs to get back into NASCAR. A lot of people have said that Stewart-Haas Racing, they need to rebuild. Amarola is retiring after this season. Kevin Harvick is close to retiring. Chase Briscoe and Cole Custer, they're still developing. And they got, outside of development drivers, they don't have anything outside of Ryan Preece. A lot of people have said that they need to hit the reset button and rebuild. But sometimes what you don't need is a rebuild. What you need is a manufacturer change. Sometimes all that you need is switch to a manufacturer that will become the new flagship team for Stewart-Haas Racing. Because when you look at NASCAR right now, Penske right now, Team Penske, they are Ford's flagship team right now, and RFK is on the rise. So Stewart-Haas Racing, they're right now second fiddle, but depending on how RFK does this season, they could be relegated to third fiddle. I don't know if that's possible, but it's pretty possible because Roush, RFK, they're on the rise, and Stewart-Haas Racing, well, they're expected to improve. I don't think they will do by much. But compared to what you can get from Ford, imagine what you can get from Dodge. You will be hands down the flagship team because the only other Dodge team in the Cup Series will be Rickwar Racing, and Rickwar Racing has an alliance, a technical alliance with Stewart-Haas Racing, so they will always be inferior to them. Like, in a way, they will be a satellite team. Usually, satellite teams don't always overperform the mothership, like the main team, unless that team is, of course, Colleague Racing last year. But still, Dodge having Stewart-Haas Racing will give them will put them ready to go. Not only will they give them a flagship team, but a competitive flagship team that can go immediately. Something that wasn't available for them back in 2013. It makes sense for them. It makes sense for Josh to rejoin NASCAR now with all of the Stewart-Haas Racing and how their relationship with Tony Stewart has soured with Ford. It makes sense for Josh to make the jump and see what happens. It couldn't happen 10 years ago, but it could happen now. Like, the writing is on the wall for them. Who knows? And let's not forget, ever since Dodge left the sport and NASCAR was only left with Chevrolet, Ford, and Toyota as its three manufacturers, NASCAR has always looked to fill that void and try and get that fourth manufacturer into the sport. A lot of rumors have been pointing towards Nissan, Honda, hell, even Tesla. Even Tesla is slated to work with, by the end of the decade, a lot of people are speculating that Tesla might be working with NASCAR in some capacity, either as a manufacturer or as a part supplier. It's really possible. But of course, there's also been Dodge in the mix as well. And if you ask me, I would really love to see Dodge back in the NASCAR. Like, the only correct choice for me as a fourth manufacturer returning to NASCAR is Dodge. Simply because they have a lot of history in the sport and they really tried so hard to stay in NASCAR that the way they left, honestly, now that I think about it, it was really tragic how nobody left Dodge, gave Dodge a chance. So I really feel they deserve their time back in the. They deserve a chance to get back into NASCAR, and who knows? Again, maybe StewartHaas Racing could be that team that gives them that chance. With that being said, however, if StewartHaas Racing decides to switch to Dodge, that means that they will lose all of those driver development program that they have worked on. Outside of Ryan Preece, of course, because Ryan Preece has been signed by Kevin Harvick's management firm. He's basically a StewartHaas Racing driver, so they will be able to retain him. But outside of Ryan Preece, all of those other development drivers that StewartHaas Racing has access to, they are not SHR drivers. They are Ford Performance development drivers. They are only going to drive for Ford teams. That said, all of those drivers you see, the Gray brothers, Tanner Gray, Taylor Gray, you see Hailie Deegan as well, all of those drivers are Ford drivers. They're not going to drive for Dodge just because StewartHaas Racing switched. They're going to stay with Ford. So, does it make sense for StewartHaas Racing to switch to Dodge, knowing that they will lose all of those development drivers in the process? Especially when Hailie Deegan is expected to move to Xfinity. I don't know if they might want to risk that, especially since compared to a team like Hendrick, in my opinion, StewartHaas Racing is in no position to even entertain making that move. Because if you look at Hendrick Motorsports, they have all four of their drivers are under 30 years old. Or I don't know if Larson is 30 years old already, but all of those drivers are either 30 years old or under. They are in a pretty good situation. Imagine if Hendrick Motorsports made a manufacturer switch. I know they won't, but I'm just saying, if they would, they can afford that because all their Cup drivers, all of them are very good, and they can carry them into for the long term, while Hendrick Motorsports starts making starts prospecting for new development drivers to put in their own pipeline. For StewartHaas Racing, however, they have Chase Briscoe and Cole Custer, which are still finding their finding their footing in the Cup Series, and then Kevin Harvick and Aric Almirola are on their way out. And once either of them retires, once Almirola retires, Ryan Preece is the odds-on favorite to replace him in the 10 car. But when Harvick retires, who's gonna be who's gonna be there to replace him? Nobody. If Stewart-Haas Racing switches to Dodge, then the only drivers they're gonna have for the long term are Ryan Preece, Chase Briscoe, Cole Custer, and nobody else, because Dodge, they will need to start their own driver development program, and that's gonna take some time because they're gonna have to start prospecting for talented drivers. They're also gonna have to try and poach drivers away from other manufacturers like Toyota or Chevrolet. So, with that being said, would it make sense for Stewart-Haas Racing to risk all of that, to lose all of those development drivers, especially when Kevin Harvick and Ari Almirola are on their way out? I don't think so. What I think Stewart-Haas Racing should do, they should rebuild. Almirola retires, Ryan Preece to the 10 car, and then after Kevin Harvick retires, then they find somebody suitable to replace him, and then if Stewart-Haas Racing remains competitive, then yeah, I think at that point then, if they can entertain like the Dodge talks return to NASCAR, they can have like Dodge becoming the flagship team. I think they would, but right now they are in my opinion, they are in no position to risk making a manufacturer switch, because their team structure right now, they are rebuilding. It doesn't make sense for a rebuilding team to make a manufacturer switch. They will be just starting from scratch, and they will still be, that would just hamstring the rebuilding process. That's just what I'm saying. The rumor is exciting though, and I would really love to see Dodge get back into NASCAR. However, I just don't feel like the time is now. I feel like Stewart-Haas Racing is the right team, but I just don't feel that they should make that switch, at least for the time being, given the situation of their team right now.